As long ago as 1971, Richard Nixon was heard on the Oval Office tapes grousing about the Rumsfeld problem.
Rumsfeld's a different cup of tea, you know. We have to send him.
Donald Rumsfeld was a presidential aide and maybe too big for his britches. Nearly 3 decades later, the Rumsfeld problem came to the Pentagon with orders from President Bush to shake the place up.
Change is hard for people.
Change is hard, but did you make it harder than it had to be by alienating people?
If you don't want to change and someone above you wants to, it's not fun.
The former college wrestler grappled with a military establishment he viewed as unimaginative and cumbersome. What started as a bureaucratic battle over the size and speed of U.S. military forces became a matter of life and death after 9/11. Rumsfeld wanted small commando teams on the ground in Afghanistan to call in airstrikes. But when the bombing started, they still hadn't made it in. And his famous impatience boiled over.
This is how you quote yourself in the book, talking to Tommy Franks, the commander. "We are sitting here like little birds in a nest, waiting for someone to drop food in our mouths."
Sometimes I'm colorful.
And he wrote what he called the Goose Egg Memo to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. "I am seeing next to nothing that is thoughtful, creative, or actionable. How can that be?"
That was a good memo. And what I wanted to do is to put some sense of urgency into this big Department of Defense, the bureaucracy.
Why'd you call it the Goose Egg Memo?
Because I think in the memo I said, what are we coming up with? A goose egg. We haven't got any new creative ideas how this department can contribute to the global war on terror. Every day the targeting and effectiveness has improved, and that has...
In public, he relished the role special forces played in the swift ouster of the Taliban. In private, he was warning President Bush, Afghanistan risks becoming a swamp for the United States.
See, this is what keeps guys like me in business. You're urging patience in public, and in private, you're writing things like the Goose Egg Memo.
Mm-hmm.
But do you see the disconnect between the public and private statements?
No, there's no disconnect at all.
But in private, you're much more unhappy with what the system is doing.
Well, and once you're satisfied and comfortable in a war, you lose.
The Bush administration certainly wasn't satisfied with just going after Osama bin Laden. Even before the bombing of Afghanistan began, it was secretly planning to take out Saddam Hussein.
When did you first talk to President Bush about going after Saddam?
Oh, I think it was in September.
So before the first U.S. boot is on the ground in Afghanistan.
Called me into the Oval Office, and he said, "Do you have a war plan for Iraq?"
But as he was gearing up for war, the Secretary of Defense was engulfed by a personal crisis. His son Nick was losing his own battle with drug addiction.
Tough.
Because he was disappearing for weeks at a time now. And he had just shown up? Is that how it...
I think that's right. It's a painful process.
You know, this is the thing. I got to ask you this, because this shows people something so different about you.
Nick made it to rehab, but just as U.S. forces were storming Baghdad, Rumsfeld's wife, Joyce, nearly died.
She ended up with a perforated appendix, and she was being poisoned.
The way you write about it in the book, you thought you might lose her. So how's that work? 15 hours a day, Secretary of Defense, war going on.
People were risking their lives.
When do you get
You simply have to pay attention, and I did. Go early in the morning to see her.
You would go see her early in the morning?
Yeah, very early.
How long did that go on for?
Days.
Days. Do you think it affected any of your decisions?
I don't know. And look at the view. What a spectacular sight.
The Rumsfelds now spend much of their time on their ranch near Taos, New Mexico. They began dating in high school, but went their separate ways in college until he launched a preemptive strike.
I just simply didn't want to get married. But I didn't want her to marry someone else. It was one of those things. And so I caved in and asked her to marry me, and fortunately she said yes, and that was, I think, 56 years ago.
56 years of high-pressure, high-profile jobs as a congressman, White House Chief of Staff, and Secretary of Defense, not once, but twice.
Are you consulted on big decisions, professional decisions?
Give me an example. Like, should I go back to the Pentagon again and be Secretary of Defense?
For openers.
He didn't have the nerve to even tell me about it for 2 hours after was asked.
That's true.
So he's afraid of me, basically.
You were taking a nap.
And she's not taken with his celebrity.
But there was this phase when he was a rock
A
star.
rock star.
Yeah.
And then the minute, I mean, if you think that fazed me, it didn't at all. Do you know? Because you know it will end. And then he'll be the GOAT.
Which is what happened starting in the spring of 2003 after Rumsfeld recruited former State Department official Paul Bremer to run the occupation of Iraq.
He worked for you.
He supposedly worked for me. He really never did.
It seems like he almost just blew you off.
We had given him written guidance as to what to do. And it said, let's get an Iraqi face on this. Let's get Iraqi leadership going. And Bremer didn't want to go fast. He was highly critical in his book about the Iraqi people and suggesting they weren't capable of managing a 3-car parade.
On top of that, the military commander, Ricardo Sanchez, was the most junior lieutenant general in the Army and had a scandalously undermanned headquarters.
I raised 16 kinds of the dickens about it, and the Army didn't get it staffed. He went on for a long period with a seriously understaffed command.
It was a setup for failure, and Rumsfeld was in charge.
You are responsible for the occupation of Iraq.
Supposedly.
There's a presidential directive saying you are
Right.
responsible.
Mm-hmm.
You have a command which is not up to the job. You have the civilian authority in Iraq not really taking your guidance.
And not working closely with the military, which is unfortunate.
Why did you stand for that?
You have to cut him some slack. You have to assume that he knows what he's doing and work with him, and he's there on the ground.
Then in April 2004, the Abu Ghraib scandal with its still shocking photos broke. Rumsfeld offered to resign twice, but the president said no.
Do you think it would have been better if you had insisted on resigning?
I think so.
How would that have made things better?
Well, it would have been a stronger signal to the world that we didn't accept that kind of behavior.
Did you feel it was your fault?
No.
You were responsible, but it wasn't your fault.
Exactly.
Finally, in 2006, with Iraq on the verge of all-out civil war, the president told Rumsfeld he had to go.
It was hard for him to do that, to come to that conclusion. And of course, I felt the same way when I had to fire somebody. I didn't like it either. And he said, "Are you okay with this?" And I said, "Absolutely."
Is he responsible for what went wrong? We all were responsible, he says. We all agreed.